Visit the bread aisle in any grocery store or the bakery and you'll find yourself overwhelmed with choices. You might be gravitating towards plain old white bread. Maybe it's nostalgia? But there's plenty of reasons why you should never buy white bread that you need to know about. Say you pick up a loaf of white bread at the store. Have you ever actually looked at the ingredients? A report from Intech Open examined the additives and preservatives used in commercial bread making. It's shocking stuff. There are oxidants and reductants to help strengthen the dough, make it rise more efficiently, and to help encourage the development of gluten. Then there are emulsifiers and a class of ingredients called hydrocolloids that also impact things like gluten development and crumb size, which goes on to affect the texture of the bread. That's not even getting into the preservatives that help extend shelf life. If you opt for baking your own white bread at home, however, the ingredients are much simpler: water, salt, yeast, and flour. That's it. Leading UK baker Andrew Whitley spoke to The Independent about why this is such a big deal and confirmed that commercial bread making went through a massive overhaul in the 1960s. Now, enough time has passed that scientific studies show that this process of making bread easier to commercially produce while also extending shelf life has had a definite impact on nutrition and, in turn, public health. Some further food for thought? Whitley adds that there are some additives that don't even need to be legally disclosed, as they're considered, quote, processing aids, not ingredients. Bottom line, making your own bread can go a long way in removing unnecessary additives and preservatives from your diet. Baking is a science, it's said, and there's no denying the fact that bread can be intimidating to baking newbies. But it doesn't have to be this way. Even if you opt to take some shortcuts, it's been found that baking gives you more than a tasty loaf of fresh bread at the end. It can also give you a little bit of stress relief. This fact has a wonderful bit of science to back it. According to the Huffington Post, in 2017, researchers at London's Bethlem Royal Hospital tried something new with a group of their patients: bread baking. While participating in 2-hour-long baking sessions, they also answered questions about their mental health. It was a small study, but the results were telling. Participants reported that baking bread decreased their anxiety, made them more relaxed, and added a sense of purpose and accomplishment to their day. According to the Bold Age, this works for a few reasons. The act of kneading and braiding bread can have almost meditative stillness and bring about a sense of mindfulness while allowing a person to focus on the here and now of the moment. Then there's the sense of accomplishment when the loaf comes out of the oven. Seriously, what's better than the smell of freshly baked bread? The bottom line is that you owe yourself the peace, relaxation, and focus that comes with baking bread, not buying it.
This is the joy for me. I love bread. I love bread.
Sodium intake is, on the whole, a huge problem in the United States. Healthline says that, on average, Americans get about 3,400 milligrams of sodium in their diet every day, while the recommendation is less than 2,300 milligrams. In an ideal world, experts say that should actually be about 1,500 milligrams. While white bread doesn't seem like an obvious suspect when it comes to high-sodium foods, the Center for Science in the Public Interest says that some kinds can contain a shocking amount of salt. For example, they found that a single slice of Pepperidge Farm's Farmhouse Hearty White Bread had the same amount of salt as 21 potato chips, and that's after the company revamped their recipes to cut down on the sodium. Vox took a look at other reports that examined other kinds of white bread for their salt content and found some, like rosemary focaccia from a bakery in Canada, that contained a higher percentage of salt than actual salt water. On the other hand, there's the popular South African white bread that had a higher single-serving salt content than 4 servings of McDonald's fries. As a general rule, they found that white bread did tend to have more salt than other types of bread, which we can learn 2 things from. Not only is it better to skip the white bread if you're concerned about your salt, but it's important to read labels too. White bread doesn't just taste different than, say, rye, it has a much different texture as well. Imagine biting into a slice of white bread. It kind of smushes, right? Many of you may have also noticed that the bread gets almost immediately sticky, to the point where the bread bits adhere to your teeth. Definitely not a great feeling at all. According to Dentistry with Smiles, that happens because of the high percentage of refined carbohydrates present in that slice of white bread. When you eat it, the sugars and bacteria in your saliva start to break the refined carbs down immediately. Those new compounds stick to your teeth. Anyone who has ever had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on white bread can attest to this, as it's not just the peanut butter and sugary jelly that makes this particular sandwich so sticky. The Center for Implants and General Dentistry adds that the compounds left behind by this interaction are highly acidic. They are so acidic, in fact, that they can damage your all-important tooth enamel. The result is a higher instance of tooth decay and even gum disease. So, when it comes to dentists' recommendations for less painful visits, skipping the regular dose of white bread every day seems like a really good idea. Stress or boredom-related eating can definitely sabotage the most well-intentioned meal plan. But what about those times you eat because you are, actually hungry, only to find that you're extremely hungry again just an hour or so later? You're not alone. In fact, it might have something to do with your choice of foods. Dr. Sue Dakotis is an internist and specialist in weight loss. She says that eating white bread has a different effect on your body than other types of bread. White flour lacks the bran that's found in other types of flour and bread. Bran has a high fiber content. That fiber is important not just for digestion and keeping everything moving comfortably, digestively speaking, but it's also what helps make you feel full after you've eaten. Time adds that there's also a double whammy going on here, as white bread is a highly processed food that also interferes with your body's ability to normalize your blood sugar levels. This ultimately leaves you still craving more food, even though you've just eaten.
Joey doesn't share food!
It might seem like a small thing, but one study done in Spain seems to show that it can have a huge impact. According to UPI, when researchers looked at 9,000 participants, they found that those who favored white bread over other types and ate it on a daily basis were about 40% more likely to struggle with their weight. When registered dietitian Erin Polinsky-Wade spoke with Everyday Health about the downsides of white bread, she gave a very good reason that people might want to skip it, particularly if they're concerned about the potential of developing diabetes. Polinsky-Wade says that when white flour is stripped of things like protein and fiber, it, and the products made with it, are digested much faster than counterparts made with multigrain flours. That, in turn, sends a person's blood sugar skyrocketing. Anyone who has felt the roller coaster ride that up and down blood sugar can send you on knows what comes next. A crash. That's a short-term reason to skip a white bread sandwich, but what about the long-term consequences of consuming loads of white bread? Polinsky-Wade says that the imbalance in blood sugar caused by white bread makes the body's insulin production go into overdrive. Over time, that increases a person's insulin resistance and, perhaps most alarmingly, their likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. There are a lot of frustrating things in life, to be certain. One of the little annoyances that's up there is having your heart set on a sandwich or some toast, then finding a bloom of nasty mold on your bread. Here's where white bread comes in. According to reference, a general rule of thumb is that the more dense the bread, the slower it will be to host mold. That means your loaf of light and fluffy white bread is going to go moldy much faster than wheat bread or pretty much any of your other choices. If you're the type that likes to make a loaf last for a bit so you can have those late-night sandwiches, skipping the white just might mean skipping the disappointment of a blue-green slice of bread. That said, there are a few other things to keep in mind. A commercial loaf will last longer than a homemade one. The trade-off is the inclusion of all those preservatives, and let's be honest, does a loaf of homemade bread last long enough to even think about molding? We didn't think so. Regardless of what kind of bread we're talking about, your best bet to keep bread fresh is to freeze any remaining bits and then reheat the slices in an oven as you need them. And no, do not put it in the fridge. That can dry out your bread and make it go stale even faster. Migraine sufferers will know the telltale signs that one is lurking just around the corner, waiting to turn into full-blown agony. The Mayo Clinic says that while there is a lot about migraines that remains a mystery even to neurologists, doctors do know that different people might be susceptible to migraines when they're exposed to certain individual triggers. Common ones include bright lights, specific smells, and changes in the weather, along with certain food additives. And it's the last one we're interested in for our conversation about white bread. Very Well Fit says that one of the most common preservatives used in white bread is an additive called calcium propionate. While it has been thoroughly vetted by the US Food and Drug Administration and determined to be generally recognized as safe, or GRAS, there is some evidence that it can be a migraine trigger in some people. Healthline agrees, saying that instances of severe headaches caused by this particular additive are rare. However, if that little bit of knowledge can save even one person from suffering through migraines triggered by something in their white bread, it's worth mentioning. It might seem like all the unnerving discoveries about white bread are a modern thing, but let's get a little historical context. Let us look back to the 19th century, which wasn't all that long ago, and you'll find that white bread was always a bit dodgy. Of course, Victorian folks had different reasons for taking a second or third look at their loaf of white bread. According to the BBC, Victorian-era bakers often struggled with something that's unfortunately pretty widespread throughout the human race: greed. Everything is a business, even food. To that end, dishonest bakers replaced flour with other cheaper and heavier ingredients like plaster, chalk, and even alum, an ingredient better suited to detergent. Vassar College's Professor Anthony S. Wall says that the trend had caught on in such force that, by the 1870s, health and social reformers had proved that about half of all the bread contained high amounts of alum. This wasn't just dishonest. These corner-cutting baking practices were downright dangerous and, in some cases, deadly. Families who relied on bread as a major part of their diet were soon facing malnutrition and chronic gastrointestinal distress. Those could prove to be fatal, especially for the children who ate the spoiled bread. The widespread practices of contaminating food with ingredients that were often neither healthy nor actually edible led to the establishment of legislation governing things like food safety and labeling. White bread, it appears, has a pretty rough history already. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more mashed videos about your favorite foods are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.